Hi folks, in this video we're going to be looking at how to pin your miniatures to scenic resin bases, or any scenic base that you've built up using other material other than the standard plastic base that comes in the box with your miniature. This is actually a really easy and beginner friendly technique, so without any further ado, let's cue the music. The first thing that we want to consider when attaching this miniature to the base is what's going to be our most secure contact point for the miniature. Now, a lot of the time, the reason that you want to pin something to the base is because they don't have a solid point of connection to the model. If you were to just super glue it down, then it'd be very easy to break off in transit. So we're going to add a pin, and this will be drilled through the model and through the base and glued in place to allow it that little bit of extra join security. Generally, if you can, you want to try and drill a hole into your miniature at a point where you're not going to very quickly tear through the miniature itself. So if you're going through a foot, if it's a running foot, you want to try and pick apart that foot which it's not going to burst through the toe or the upper bit of the foot, while still having enough to put a pin inside the model. So here I've taken a 1mm drill bit and I have drilled a hole inside the tactical rock that this Space Marine chaplain is stood on. I am then going to take a small piece of paperclip and work out how far that is going to go into the hole in this miniature. And paperclip itself is 0.8mm, and I've used a 1mm drill bit just to give us a little bit of playing room. It allows us to adjust for any slight angle if there's a strange connection between the foot and the base that we're going to be using. And I'd recommend doing a little bit of drilling, then testing with the paperclip, and then going backwards and forwards. Although it doesn't matter too much, you do want to be careful about how big a hole you're going into your miniature. To fix the pin in place, I'd recommend using your favourite brand of superglue, putting a small amount above the hole and then pushing the paperclip in. This will coat the paperclip in superglue. Then put this aside to dry. Before you cut the paperclip to create a pin, please make sure that you give it a bit of a wobble test just to make sure that the glue has set properly. And I do recommend that when you use a pair of hobby snips to cut down this paperclip, that you use an old pair or you use a set of pliers that have a bit for cutting wire. I wouldn't recommend cutting this with your nice plastic sprue cutters. Now that you have your pin, you can use the end of the pin to mark out where you want to apply a hole to drill through your base. If your base isn't very obvious and it's very difficult to mark it with the paperclip, you can always take some bright paint such as red or bright green, place it on the end of the paperclip and tap it to the base, and this will give you a marker for which to drill with. And just like in the earlier clip, we're going to be using a 1mm drill bit on our pin vise to carefully drill through this resin base. Once the hole has been drilled, I do recommend that you do a test fit. You may find that the hole isn't quite in the place that you wanted it to be, so it might be worth seeing if you need to drill a second hole, so it's always worth having a look. At this point you can now trim down the pin if you've got a really long pin to make sure that it doesn't stick out the bottom of the base, so that your base is going to sit nice and flush on the table. With the pin placement and length checked, you can now apply some super glue to the base of the model. We're going to attach it and along the length of the pin. Once you've applied this glue, you can now fix this model onto the base. Be careful as you're doing so to make sure you're getting the angle right, because super glue is pretty quick drying, especially if you're using an activator. If your model is in a running pose and a position that you think might be a bit wobbly, you may want to use some blue tack to prop it up, or to use an activator to really help quickly set that super glue. Once the glue is dried, this model is looking really nice, sat here, nice and secure on this scenic resin base. What I'd also like to briefly touch on in this video is blending your miniature into the sculpted base. Now this chaplain model here has a rock that his foot is stood on, and that needs to have something to make it seem like it's part of this ruined stairway that he stood upon. If you've pinned your model to a standard plastic base or something a bit less ornate, then this isn't such of a worry, as you're going to be applying some form of texture or some ground to allow your model to look like it's running through an environment. So what I've done here is I've taken some texture paint and been very careful with the spreader and just applying it all around the edges, allowing it to hide that very sharp line between the floor and the rock that the chaplain is stood on. What this is allowing us to do here is allow this to simulate this as very small dust and rocks and particle, just like you can see at the base of the ruined pillar. If you're doing this as is an earthen environment, this is great because it allows you to just make this more earth, but I'm applying a bit more than you would normally do, as allow it to shrink when it dries, and it just should patch up any gaps that might not have been quite flat between the base of this plastic model and the resin scenic base. Once the texture paint is dried, I've painted it in just the way that I painted the rest of the space, and it really looks like that rock is meant to be there and this chaplain has blended seamlessly into the scenic base. If you enjoyed this video, why not consider subscribing? It's free of charge, it helps me out, and you get further videos just like this one in your YouTube feed. Till next time, folks.